Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I love zombie movies, and in my favorite ones, the real monsters aren't the living dead, but many of the humans who remain alive. So when I think of Appsec, I think more about how we could collaborate to find and fix vulns rather than worry about just how many vulns are out there. Which means, this week, we chat with Akira Brand about creating educational resources, secure coding, and code reviews. In the news segment, a verdict on Uber's security, Rust in the Linux kernel, top exploited CVEs, prototype pollution, cloud security docs, and more. Head to a mall and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Securing the modern enterprise requires insights into massive amounts of data. NVIDIA Morpheus harnesses the power of AI and GPU computing to help protect networks in a way never before possible, enabling 100% data visibility to provide cybersecurity analysts the tools to identify, capture, and act on threats and anomalies. Sign up for a free 1-hour NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute course. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/NVIDIA. Businesses need API protection that goes beyond signature matching and can stay ahead of attackers and their various tactics and tools. They need a solution that is more patient and prepared than a modern attacker and can track their actions over time. ThreatX is the only API attack protection platform that delivers on the promise of stopping API attacks in real time while giving you the visibility you need to prepare for future attacks. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/ThreatX. ThreatLocker is a global cybersecurity leader paving the way for businesses everywhere to implement a zero-trust security solution that not only protects business-critical data, but also helps mitigate cyber attacks. ThreatLocker's unique endpoint solutions help you to work smart and strengthen your security infrastructure from the ground up. ThreatLocker's allow listing, ring fencing, storage control, elevation control, and network access control solutions give you a more secure approach to blocking the exploits of unknown application vulnerabilities. If you're looking to enhance your cybersecurity and stop zero-day vulnerabilities exploiting your data, reach out to a ThreatLocker cyber hero today. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker to learn more. This is episode 215, recorded October 10th, 2022. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John, Knight of the Living Dead, Kinsella.
I'm working on setting up my new, it's going to be one of those kiosks in the middle of the mall that has like all set like vulnerabilities, like have CVSS rating vulnerabilities. Maybe I'll have like little like bracelets with like your CVSS heart scores on them or something.
Oh my God, this is amazing. Yes. I'm investing. I want in, John. Let me know. So while you're waiting for John to pitch the remainder of his mall kiosk, please don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, a Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Akira is a technologist in the broadest sense of the term, a developer, tech community leader, enthusiastic tech educator, ideation queen, and most recently, bridge builder between the tech world and traditional art forms. Her interests and experience span web development, community building, cybersecurity training, and introducing new technologies and ideas to software developers and performing arts professionals. Hello, Akira. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone.
It's wonderful for you to join us because we've had a theme in the last couple of episodes about education, and we're switching gears from the university level and what that looks like for students and more into those of us or those of you perhaps who are writing secure code, or perhaps we should start off with writing code, but we want it to be secure. So Akira, your background actually I think is development, and you're looking at secure coding, doing some of this education, but as you're going around looking at the web for resources to help you, are there a lot of resources out there? What have you been finding just for the aid to help you get started with something to teach?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yes, my background is in development. Also, I have a very large background in teaching other people how to develop software as well. So this is very much in my wheelhouse. As far as what I've found online, I think my favorite resource is OWASP. Like OWASP is like this giant conglomerate of brilliant minds, much smarter than I am, that talks about secure coding practices, best practices. My favorite thing that they have is they have something called the Secure Coding Dojo, which is fantastic. I've taken a little bit of it myself. It's fantastic to just have like little cheat sheets, but also it's a whole class that you can take, and it will teach you with very concrete examples some of the best, I think, the best practices for secure coding. So, for example, something that happens a lot when we talk about secure coding and when we try to educate people that are already in the field is we will tell them like, okay, just do input validation, just do parameterized statements, like just do all these other best practices. And the people in the field might be like, that's cool. What does that look like? And things like this on OWASP, like for the Secure Coding Dojo, actually show you very concrete examples. So that's one thing I've learned throughout my career as not only a programmer, but as an educator is the more examples you can show people, the better. One other thing I want to mention before we go on. Another great place to learn secure coding practices is a community that I'm actually part of managing. And I'm not just saying this because I manage the community and I want you all to join, but I do want you all to join. It's called We Hack Purple, and we have a lot of secure coding courses. So we have like a secure coding course. I think it's about 4 hours long, something like that. And we have all kinds of Appsec courses as well. You can just learn the basics of Appsec. It goes all the way up to advanced level and different, all kinds of different courses there. And they're all free as well. So those are my two favorite is We Hack Purple and OWASP. I'm sure there's many others out there. But sometimes it can feel a little bit, how do I say this? It can feel a little scattered, right? That's one thing that's difficult about learning how to code in general is that the more advanced you get, the less resources are out there for the particular problem you're trying to solve, and the more kind of all over the place they can feel. So definitely check those two places out first.
Yeah, and I love the part where you're talking about input validation, because to me, the idea that if our secure coding awareness program is validate all your inputs, that's basically one step away from write secure code, and then we're done. And have you really helped anyone? So I'm curious, you were telling us from your perspective of going through the dojo, going through the resources that are out there so you can learn. And it sounds like what's resonating with you, what's working with you are examples.
Yes.
If you turn that around and you're doing the education, tell us a bit more how you've seen just effective ways to educate people in general. And so that people can learn rather than just memorize what this list says and then go away and forget it.
That's such a good question. I like to base a lot of how I educate people on a book called A Mind for Numbers, which is a fantastic book by, I'm actually going to look it up really quickly. I just forgot the author's name. Named, sorry, one second. Barbara Oakley. Thank you very much. He's on it. So Barbara Oakley wrote this fantastic book called A Mind for Numbers, and it's all about how to learn math and science, even if you are not necessarily a gifted person at either one of those things. I love math. I love science. I love programming, but I personally have to work very hard at it. It's not something that comes very natural to me. So even though I have this love for it, I do have to work very, very hard. In her book, she kind of describes a couple of things, one of which is there's sort of two different ways to approach education. One is a bottom-up approach, and one is a top-down approach. So the bottom-up is you're doing problems, you're trying to solve maybe particular coding exercises, but you don't really have a context of like when to use these tools and why you would need to use these tools. And then top-down is giving someone the context of like, okay, here's what application security is. Here's why we're doing application security. Here's why you should use these tools. Here's what, if you use these tools, the kind of things and problems that you can prevent. And both are really necessary for good education. So I myself like to give classes that start with that top down. So we talk about AppSec. we talk about the tool that I'm going to teach them. We talk about why you should use this tool. And again, like what kinds of problems you can avoid by using the tool. Then we switch to a bottom up approach where we literally will build something with this tool. That it's usually a tool that my company is releasing. So I do a lot of training on that. We'll do something, we'll build something with this tool from the bottom up, and we'll kind of parse through like, oh, like what does this particular section do? What does this particular section do? And then we kind of meet in the middle, as it were. The last thing that is really, really good for learning is immediate recall. So what I'll have my students do is I'll say at the very end of the class, okay, I want you all to tell me 1 to 2 things that you remember from this class. Because when you recall the information, you can actually start to put it from your working memory into your long-term memory. So it's not just kind of going into the RAM of your brain, right? And then you just completely forget it once the class is over. If you can recall as much as possible, then you will be able to, again, move the sort of chunk the information, move it from your short-term memory into your long-term memory, and you will have a better success of recalling those tools and tricks in the context later on.
Yes, our brains are filled with far too much with volatile RAM, aren't they? You're describing great approaches to this, and I like too that, you know, why are we learning this? Because I think unfortunately some of the whys can be, well, it's because it's October and it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we should be, or it's because we're supposed to, because some, you know, PCI says we have to do some type of awareness or some other compliance program. So what are some ways that you found successful to land that why, to get the engagement from developers for them to say, oh, this actually will benefit me in a way, or this makes sense. I actually have some buy-in to the why of why secure coding is going to make a difference here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of a couple things you can appeal to, right? You can first off appeal to what is sometimes called FUD in this industry, which stands for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So you can certainly appeal to that. And the way that you would do that is say, you know, if you don't practice these best practices, you could have a data breach that could cost your company millions of dollars. It's a huge pain to fix, makes you look really bad. I personally don't like doing that. A colleague of mine named Wesley Faulkner released a document recently. It was an article about how to appeal to developers, and he used it in conjunction with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So as far as like a developer goes, they're kind of toward the top when they come to a workshop. They want something that has to do with self-fulfillment and learning more, having more agency, right? So the way that I try to appeal to developers is showing them, hey, you can have that agency, you can have that self-reliance when you use things like DAS tools, when you use things like DAS tools, when you understand secure coding principles, and even if you don't implement them all the time, like it's good to know about them and at least try once in a while. And that agency then will come because the Appsec team will not be on your back all the time, right? Which is fantastic. And another thing that I like to appeal to is just like the coolness of having new knowledge. I don't know about anyone else, but for me, when I learn something new, it's almost like, it's very like, it's great. I don't know how to explain it. It's almost like, it's like a symphony all of a sudden that you just like hear for the first time and you're like, wow, this really resonates. Like this feels so good. Like it actually like resonates in my nervous system almost as like something that's like really, really good. It's really, really exciting. And I try to pass that excitement forward because I have a hunch if you work in software development, you enjoy learning new things. Otherwise, you would be miserable at working in software development. So if I can even present it as, look, I'm just going to teach you something new that you can take to your daily job and just enjoy yourself like in the pleasure of learning something new, then absolutely. There's one more thing that I also like to appeal to, and that is that writing secure code and kind of being a security champion on your team is awesome for your career. Like it really sets you apart as a developer on your team, and you can actually use some of that like as leverage. Like if you want to get a raise or a promotion, you can say, hey, like I implemented security best practices. I taught the team how to implement security best practices. And we all know that when we have like secure code, it will prevent data breaches that could cost us millions of dollars. So technically I saved this company like $5 million because that's, or whatever it is, the average cost of an annual data breach. Like by doing the secure coding practices, and that looks awesome to your boss if you frame it the right way.
Yes. Absolutely constructive ways of approaching this. I want to, we'll come back to a lot of that education part, but also too, we are talking about secure coding, which I think is also quite related to code reviews. In other words, we want to make sure when people write their own code, they can either find the flaws that they put them themselves, or if they're doing just a natural code review, that they can find the flaws that others create. So I'm curious, tell us just a little bit, what does a healthy code review look like in general? And is it really any different from security, or maybe how different from a security code review does it look like?
Sure. So I think the best way to do a secure code review is to practice reading a lot of secure code, so that you can catch things like, oh, like, look at this input is actually being validated. Then that's how I know what it looks like. And you can kind of start to pattern match after what pieces of secure code looks like. That's also why I like the secure coding dojo. I really like OWASP because there's so many examples. So the best way, again, to practice is just to read secure code over and over and over again, so you know what to look for. So I think that would be what I would say.
Yeah, I want to imagine there's got to be more than just the code itself, because even from the educational part, you're describing different ways people learn, different ways to add context, add relevance to a topic so people learn. So what about the human side of doing, whether it's a code review or just a secure code review? What are the good ways, or of course, perhaps the bad ways to avoid in doing those types of things?
That's a good question. Like, adding on the human side, what I personally would say is try to be not a jerk at the end of the day. I've had, I'm personally, I'm a huge jerk. So, yeah, right. I think, let me say it this way. I've had code reviews kind of one of three ways. Either the person is very constructive in their criticism, like they're still honest about, hey, this could be better, but here's how I suggest that you make it better. That's always really productive. I think personally that's the best way to do it. And then it kind of goes from best to worst. Then there's kind of medium of oh, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And you're like, okay, well, I'm glad that I know what I am doing incorrectly, or maybe I could be doing better. But I don't really have a lot of guidance as to what to do next. And then there's the third way, which is wow, this is awful. How could you possibly have made this mistake? And that's brutal. That's so demoralizing. So, and I feel that oftentimes, from what I hear from developers in companies that have Appsec teams, is unfortunately the relationship between the Appsec team and the development team is kind of that third way, which is not always the best. So when you're doing a code review, as kind of best practices with all code reviews, try to be constructive in your feedback. Communicate as much as you can. If you don't have time to necessarily give those suggestions or anything like that, then of course just let your teammate know, hey, I'm really pressed for time, so it's going to be a little short here, but just as long as you can know what's going on and the context. Again, it's all kind of down to context and not being a jerk.
Yes, I can imagine, rather than me coming up and saying, Akira, you're costing us $5 million a day with this horrible code. What are you thinking? That possibly isn't going to win friends now, is it?
Although I would say that if I was losing $5 million a day, then maybe I would need a sterner talking to.
Fair enough. But one of the ways there too, maybe expand it a little bit, because I think secure coding, we have been talking about input validation. That's legitimate. There's other aspects to secure coding that are authentication, authorization. There's output encoding, if we're going to talk about cross-site scripting, and other, just what does a framework look like? How to use a framework well, not well. And here's something like React's unsafe, dangerously inner HTML. I can't remember the name, but it's a fabulously named function to warn people away from this.
Yes.
So there's this aspect of it, but there's also even just thinking like security in the sense of threat modeling, or security bugs can be more subtle, and security bugs aren't necessarily use cases that pass through a unit test. They're more of abuse cases, saying, well, why would anybody do that? It's a sort of situation. So is there a way that you approach teaching that type of attacker mentality, or doing something with threat modeling that makes it more dry than just what could go wrong? Let's fix it, in the most monotone voice ever.
I think the thing that I like to emphasize in those arenas, because, I'll say it this way, is communication between the dev team and the Appsec team. The reason I say that is because most of the time, things like threat modeling and doing that higher level strategy doesn't come down to developers. It comes down to the Appsec team. Hopefully, the Appsec team is being involved in like the design of a feature, design of software from the ground up. If they're not, then definitely step one is to get your Appsec team in the room when you're designing a feature, so they can say, hey, it's actually going to open us up to some kind of vulnerability. And then, so just understanding that the Appsec team is on your side and just asking them lots of questions. Like, one of the main points that you can also talk to about with the Appsec team is like, what are we trying to guard against right now, so that I'm not wasting a bunch of time on every single vulnerability that exists ever and just kind of chasing my own tail. Maybe the Appsec team has a particular section of the app that is insecure, like in a way that really makes sense for the business to secure right now. So maybe you need to just focus on that section of the application. Maybe for some reason you have a bunch of like cross-site scripting issues in your application all over the app, and then you can just focus on cross-site scripting. So, and again, but developers won't know that until they talk to the Appsec team. And I definitely am a big proponent of educating devs to ask questions much earlier on in the cycle, maybe even when they get the requirements. So maybe they get a spec sheet or something like that, and they can talk to the Appsec team and be like, okay, what else should I be looking for here? What should I be guarding against? What is the business case for securing this section of my application? Is it business critical, or is it really not like that huge of a deal? Not like you can be lazy about it, but maybe you don't have to dedicate as much time to it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the aspects of training or projects, or any effort in general, I think within the business world, is that we have to have a OKR or a metric, or we have to say, did you deliver value? And so, one of the things that I think you were describing there that stood out to me is that we're not talking about what does secure code look like. It seems like a pretty general, perhaps overbroad question. You sounded like it was approaching, well, what does not having this vuln class of cross-site scripting in our code base look like? That seems a bit more specific, a bit more directed in a way that you can say, yes, we're going to focus on this class, follow these patterns, look for this, and then move on to something else. So I'm curious, have you seen these types of ways either to measure success or measure the value, whether it is even just the value of developers enjoying, actually, I enjoyed that class, I would sit through another 4 hours, versus, please don't make me do that again, anything but that?
So there's a couple ways that you can make this enjoyable for developers and also appeal to them as well, like as far as like kind of segmenting things. It sort of depends on the temperament of the developer, but one thing I've learned that works really well is tying it to business value. Sometimes developers like really care about the business value, like what kind of value is this delivering to the business? How much money is this saving? How much revenue are we maybe not going to lose because there is no cross-site scripting and we can't lose all our data or whatever it is, right? So that's one way to do it. The second way in general to make developers like want to come back is I try to make classes really fun. I use memes. I use a lot of jokes. One thing I do, I tried this in a class about a couple weeks ago, and it went over really well. I made it really obvious what each particular developer was going to get as far as a win, right? So I did sort of a crowdsourced poll. I said, why do you come to workshops? Like, why not just watch a YouTube video? Workshops can be kind of cumbersome. Sometimes they're at like bad times. You take time out of your workday. Like, why are you here? And one of the big things I got is like, well, I want to experience in real time some wins. And I find that when I spelled that out, like, okay, you're going to have up to 8 big wins. You're going to learn about Appsec. You're going to learn about this tool. You're going to get hands-on time. You're going to learn about my company, which I think is a win because you get to know some tooling, and then you're going to get to know me, which is clearly a win. And you'll get to like network with each other. Big win. And when I spelled those out and I made them really obvious, like throughout the presentation, like here's the win where you learn about Appsec, people loved that. Like they really enjoyed like, all right, yeah, I'm like winning. This is awesome. Because what can happen sometimes in workshops, especially if there's a live demo or there's a live coding section, is maybe someone can like fall behind toward the beginning and then they're just lost in the dust, which like is terrible. It's an awful feeling. And everyone's like, yeah, I totally got it. Like, this is awesome. And there's maybe only 1 or 2 facilitators. Sometimes you can't get the actual, like the hands-on help you need. Maybe your computer is an M1 and it doesn't work with the version of Docker, whatever it is, right? But you don't know that. So giving people those wins early and often so that even if they do fall behind in the class, they're like, okay, well, I at least had 3 wins and I didn't have 6, but I had 3, which is awesome. That really engages people. I think that works out really well.
Yeah, and once again, you're hitting on not the specifics of what is, here is the language we need to teach, or here is the specific design pattern for SQL injection. You're talking about how to teach and paying attention to, are people receiving the information, how are they learning and adapting to their learning styles, which I think is, we don't talk enough about as much within the AppSec industry, I think. So I really like that. I think one of the other aspects, approaches you've done is, I've heard 1 or 2 metaphors that you've brought in here, and you've also been experimenting, I think, with just other fun ways of delivering this training. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think metaphor is a wonderful way to teach. So for example, I gotta try to think of one off the top of my head. So one that I like to use a lot as far as AppSec goes is like, imagine that you're securing a house, right? And maybe I'm teaching them about AppSec, or maybe I'm teaching them more like a little bit about like the security world in general. So I'm like, okay, imagine you build a house and you don't put any locks on the doors and you don't put any windows in like the window wells, and you leave your front door open all the time, and you put a sign in your yard that says, please come steal my stuff. That's kind of what modern applications can be like from time to time. Not all the time, but it can get kind of close to that. So then it's like, okay, like now I'm going to teach you about this particular type of vulnerability. So it's maybe say like authentication and authorization would be like someone standing at your door, like checking IDs. Like, so like somehow you've hired a bouncer to let people come into your house. And people seem to really respond well to that, to understanding these metaphors. Another thing that I'm working on right now, which is so exciting, I'm super pumped about this, is I'm working on a visual novel to explain application security. So I've never seen anyone do this, and I'm not doing it just so that I can be like, oh, I'm so unique. Truth be told, I love this game called Doki Doki Literature Club. It's a terrifying horror game, and it's told through the medium of a visual novel. And I think that is brilliant. So I have a huge love for video games. I have a huge love for fantasy. And I was like, well, what if I like told a story? Like, it kind of started as like, I'm going to build an RPG based on AppSec. And I was like, that's going to be a little bit intense. And then I was like, well, maybe I'll do like a tower defense game with AppSec. But then I was like, well, why not have like this epic saga, almost like it's not going to be like the Tale of Gilgamesh, but pretty close, I would say, where there's like a hero and they have to like navigate through the world of all these dangers. And then they have like, the shield of the Dast and the sword of SCA and like the knowledge, like the wizard staff of secure coding or whatever, right? And then you use those metaphors to talk about like the different kinds of tools and the different kinds of threats. Like, like there's a hacker and he's a bear coming from the woods. He's going to tear you apart, and your data is your intestines, and you don't want to lose your data, aka your intestines, things like that. So I'm really excited for that. I'm working, one of my colleagues is a fantastic graphic designer. So I'm working with her and actually our CISO quite shockingly enough to build this, because our CISO has this huge base of knowledge. He's got the stratagem. He's like the general, right? And so I sat down with him last week and I was like, tell me everything. Like, I want to know all the things so I can build this into this visual novel. oh my God, he like downloaded so much information. It was amazing. So he's working with me. My graphic designer is working with me for like illustrating it. And I'll give it at conferences, and we're just going to click through it. And I'm going to tell the story in silly voices. So it's going to be great.
Sounds wonderful. And I would say, speaking of Gilgamesh, I don't know that cuneiform is that far removed from HTML and JavaScript anyway. So I think the idea is solid. And it does appeal to me as the idea of coming, I grew up with Infocom adventures, text adventures for being eaten by a grue or trying to find the analgesic to help out the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if you know those old games. So yes, exactly. I love this idea of just something that is beyond the PowerPoint slide that's bullet points and dry lists of training. So I'm definitely a fan of this. We'll have to keep an eye out for what this is, for how this develops.
Yeah.
Curious then, just maybe to come full circle, I started this off asking about what are some of the resources that are out there to help you with. What's out there that's missing, perhaps, or that you would love to have just other people that are doing secure education, training on secure coding, that they could perhaps collaborate with? Or what are some things that would just help you build up a great pile of intestines for us to have better code out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. The things that's missing, at least what I've seen, is like coherency in definitions of terms, right? So I was writing this article recently on threat modeling because I wanted to learn more about threat modeling. So it's like, okay, I'll just go research it and I'll try to do it. I was going to threat model a house, or actually, that's not true. I wasn't going to threat model a house. I was going to write an article on threat modeling a relationship, like what that would look like. Again, going back to this metaphor thing, like what could be the sorts of things that would attack a relationship, or, things that we have to watch out for. I started writing this article. I put a rough draft in front of my boss, who knows so much about Appsec, it's ridiculous. And she was like, "Oh, this isn't this definition. This is this definition, and this isn't this definition. This is something else." And I was like, "Really? No way!" Because this is what I found as I was doing my research. And she's like, "Yeah, that's totally wrong." So just having some cohesiveness would be really good. She and I are actually meeting later this week. I put in our meeting invite, we're going to set the record straight on threat modeling so that I fully understand what it is. But I mean, you go to one resource and it's like, this is threat modeling. And you go to another resource and it's like, this is actually that. And what you're actually talking about is a secure code review or whatever, right? And it's just a lot of different opinions. And that's tough because I actually want to know what's going on. And then I forgot the second part of your question. Can you please tell me again?
No, I think, that was a good start. And I think to sort of expand on it a bit, it sounds like there is a ton of jargon out there. And one of the things that I've appreciated is that I've been waiting to hear, this is IDOR, this is cross-site scripting type 1, this is cross-site scripting type 2, this is DOM-based cross-site scripting. Yeah. You've avoided all of that. So I haven't been triggered. It's a nice, relaxing interview for me this time, Akira. I have to thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah.
So you've been avoiding, and I think that just kind of ties into what you were saying. There's a lot of either opinions out there on different definitions, a lot of jargon, but nobody cares about the jargon necessarily, or how much they don't necessarily need to care to write secure code. So maybe one of the second part of my question perhaps would be, what would be helpful? What would you love either collaboration on, or what would you love to see just more resources that you could also bring into your visual novel, whether it's the chapter on Kubernetes, the chapter on particular language, the chapter on input validation. I'm trying to come up with a lot of chapters Dickens style, so you can at least get paid by the word for this effort.
Oh, totally, 100%. The biggest thing that I'd like collaboration on would be to have people join either the WeHack Purple community or my company's Discord, which I'll link as well. And just so we can talk with each other and say, okay, what in your opinion is a good example of DOM-based cross-site scripting? What is a good example of output encoding that you've seen in the field, and what was the context, right? So kind of, again, going from that bottom up to top down, we want to know the example. I want to hear war stories from the field, right? And I want to hear why this was a problem. I want to hear what impact it had when you fixed it, right? So that would be really useful to have just that open dialogue and that open collaboration. Another thing I would like to collaborate on, and this is a project that's going to be pretty big, and it's going to teach me a lot, which is one of the reasons I want to do it. I think sometimes teaching is the best way to learn. I want to do either one of two things. I either want to build a secure app from the ground up, like a full stack web application, and talk about like the different types of things you can do to make it secure. And this would be to build a workshop, right? So this would be a really long workshop, probably like 6 hours. And then, so either do that and just build a secure web application from the very beginning and then show concretely like these different examples of how to do this. Or I would like to take an existing vulnerable application. I know one that Bright does, which is called Broken Crystals, and it's just an intentionally vulnerable web application. But I know there's other ones out there as well. I think OWASP has one called like Insecure Inc. or something like that. And there's a bunch out there. And just fix the application with the students. Just go through each individual section and just fix it. And then explain like why you should fix it. Again, top down, like why should we care other than I'm just at this weird workshop with this lady with dreadlocks that's telling me how to do stuff, right? Like why should I care about this? But that's a huge project. And since I'm newer to my journey in Appsec, like I would probably need a lot of help. So yeah, if anyone would ever want to do something like that, that would be an amazing thing to collaborate on as well.
That's awesome. Well, I'll collaborate. And the first slide of my presentation is going to be just fix it. So that'll be the motto. Then I'll hand it over to you to do the proper education.
Great. Oh man, it's gonna be awesome. I'm already at ease.
Awesome. So as we sort of wrap up here, we only have half an hour to get all of your brain power onto secure coding and code reviews. Any final messages you'd like to leave with our listeners, or a place where they can come to see the evolution of this visual novel or some of the other fun things that you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So you can go to my website. It's www.akirabrand.com. It's just my name.com. HTTPS, of course. So that's one way to find me. I have a link to my newsletter there. There's like contact info. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email. So that's a great way to find also what I'm up to. I'll post on that website regularly. Let's see. Anything else that I want to say? Just try to educate yourself as much as you can. A little bit every day goes a long way. Even if you just take 15 minutes to work through the Secure Coding Dojo, a few times a week, that's going to put you light years ahead of where most people are in their knowledge of Appsec. So I think that will really help.
No, that's wonderful. And if I can steal from a meme, I'll say, get in losers. We're going to go learn secure coding. I love it, Akira. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This was wonderful. So we will make sure to update our show notes and drop a bunch of these links that Akira mentioned into our Discord channel as well. So you can follow along and go join her on the community that she's helping to grow, build, and train about secure coding. I want to say thank you once again to Akira. This was a fun chat. I want to thank John, thank all of our listeners. We're going to take a quick break now and return with news of the week.